Sheriff Marlene O'Connor thought she could twist the truth and shame another innocent black man for some cheap social media attention, until she learned he wasn't just passing through. Leonard Price hadn't planned to stick around in Ashford, Alabama. It was supposed to be one more short stop on a long road full of small towns where the real noise happened behind quiet doors. But the moment he rolled in off Highway 85 in his dusty blue Buick, he felt the difference. Not because it was worse than the other places, though that truth would come later, but because of how safe it all looked at first glance. A tidy main drag with church signs promising salvation, American flags waving from light poles, hardware stores run by the same families for 3 generations, and a corner cafe still baking coconut cream pies from scratch. Folks nodded as you passed. Kids rode rusty Schwinn's without helmets. The Baptist church ran a car wash fundraiser every other Saturday. To Ashford, Leonard was nobody special. Yes, black, yes, new in town, but polite, well-kept, and quiet. He rented a small 2-room out by the county line, bought groceries at Winn-Dixie with cash, had no police record, and left no internet trail beyond a plain old resume on LinkedIn. He told his landlord he did private security. That ended the conversation. Neighbors saw him drive off most evenings around 7. They figured he worked the late shift at some warehouse. In a way, he did. But instead of clocking in somewhere, Leonard was watching and listening. What the town didn't know, not even the local deputies, was that Leonard was an undercover federal man, a quiet FBI assignment, monitoring claims of racist policing and civil rights violations across backroads America. For the last 2 years, he'd been drifting, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, and now here. Places where people shrugged and said, "That's just how things are around here." Leonard knew better. His work was to blend in, gather proof, and, when the time came, step in hard enough to make it stick in court. One wrong move and the whole thing would crumble. Ashford had already given him enough smoke to know there was fire. It started with traffic stops, always the same type. Young black drivers, out of county plates, pulled over for tinted windows or weaving. Rarely any tickets, never much paperwork. Just a badge, a flashlight, and intimidation in the dark. Leonard tracked every detail. Patrol routes, badge numbers, body cam uploads, even timestamps against Facebook posts. And one name popped up again and again. Sheriff Marlene O'Connor. She wasn't just the leader of the department. She was the department's image. At 58, she'd become a small-town star, better known for her viral TikTok videos than for solid police work. The clips always had music, sharp edits, and racked up millions of views. To the outside world, she was tough but fair. Old school with a modern twist. But Leonard saw through it. The reports never matched the footage. The arrests didn't line up with the charges, and the folks she humiliated on camera? They never filed complaints. Because in Ashford, you didn't challenge the sheriff. Leonard kept his mouth shut. He wasn't there to grandstand. He was there to wait. Sundays, he strolled the aisles of the Rexall pharmacy like everybody else. He sat in the barber shop listening to old men spin stories. He memorized street corners, learned which businesses stayed open late, which ones locked up early. And then, one night, Marlene struck. To her, Leonard was just another black man walking out of a filling station. She wanted content, something bold, something that would rack up likes and comments. Sheriff O'Connor had built her reputation one viral clip at a time. At first glance, she was everything the county thought it wanted. Crisp uniform, sharp tongue, that confident strut that made folks hush when she walked in. But behind it all, she wasn't chasing justice. She was chasing clicks. Her rise in the department mirrored her rise online. It started with a video of her talking down a hot-headed husband in a domestic quarrel. It hit nearly 3 million views. After that, the badge became more stage prop than shield. She leaned into the role, started calling herself Sheriff Mar on camera, bought a GoPro for her cruiser, and even paid a college kid from Montgomery to polish her videos. Fast cuts, background music, captions like, "This is why I serve." The internet loved her. Local church ladies shared her clips in their prayer circles. Young, right-leaning folks praised her no-nonsense ways. In Ashford, Alabama, folks liked to say the town hadn't changed much since Eisenhower was president. The barbershop still smelled of aftershave and talcum powder, the Baptist choir still practiced on Thursdays, and the high school football team was still the closest thing to religion outside of Sunday mornings. But if you paid closer attention, you'd notice something had shifted. It wasn't the storefronts on Main Street or the price of a plate lunch at the diner. It was subtler than that, quieter, like the steady hum of a machine running in the background. The hum had a name: Sheriff Marlene O'Connor. At 58, Marlene should have been a seasoned presence, the kind of law officer who carried decades of experience in the lines of her face and the certainty of her decisions. Instead, she had refashioned herself into something entirely different: an icon. A star of screens small enough to fit in a teenager's hand, yet powerful enough to bend an entire county's opinion. Her TikTok account had started as an experiment. Someone's grandkid told her she should post a clip of her good work online. She had laughed it off at first, but one night she uploaded a shaky video of herself talking down a hot-headed husband in a domestic quarrel. The clip was simple, even boring in real life, but once she paired it with background music and trimmed the silence, it took on a glow. The video caught fire. Over 2 million views in just a few weeks. By the time the dust settled, Marlene wasn't just Sheriff O'Connor anymore. She was Sheriff March. From then on, she leaned into the performance. She bought a GoPro for her cruiser, hired a kid from Montgomery State to clean up her footage, and began walking into calls like a stage actress hitting her cue. Her badge sat higher on her chest, tilted just so it caught the light. She spoke with that practiced tone, low, firm, and meant to travel through a microphone. Every arrest was framed like a sermon. Every traffic stop was an audition. She had figured out that the internet didn't want nuance, it wanted narratives. And so she gave them exactly that: quick edits, catchy captions, and the confidence of a woman who believed her own myth. Behind the polished clips, though, the truth looked nothing like the feed. Her department was unraveling. The younger deputies rotated out within months, lured away by better pay and better equipment in neighboring counties. Training sessions were canceled more often than not, because she couldn't spare the manpower to cover shifts. Patrol cars broke down on county roads, radios glitched, and evidence rooms went disorganized. Inside the station, morale sagged like an old front porch. Men who had been wearing the badge for 20 years whispered about how things used to be, back before every shift felt like a backdrop for Marlene's next upload. Still, none of that mattered to her as long as the cameras kept rolling. Perception, she liked to say, was more powerful than truth. And perception was her craft. She began picking her calls carefully, choosing ones with drama, the kind of calls that made for good footage. If a case was messy, quiet, or involved tedious paperwork, she often passed it off to someone else. She didn't write reports unless she thought the footage would back her up. And more than once, the story told in her edited clips didn't match what her deputies' body cams later revealed. A man detained for aggressive behavior had been calm on the raw footage. A traffic stop described as suspicious had been nothing more than a teenager driving home after his shift at Sonic. The gaps were brushed aside by her defenders as misunderstandings, but the veterans in her department knew better. To the public, though, she was untouchable. Small towns like Ashford don't thrive on data. They thrive on impressions. Folks at the diner would share her clips between bites of fried catfish, nodding like she had restored pride to the badge. Church ladies reposted her videos with captions about strong leadership. Young conservatives in town praised her as a woman who didn't bow down to political correctness. It worked because Marlene understood the American hunger for spectacle. She had built her entire image on that hunger. but cracks were already forming. Deputy Paul Maddox, a gray-haired officer who had been with the department longer than most of the rookies had been alive, confided to a friend one night, "It's not policing anymore, it's a show. And when the show comes first, the law comes second." Other deputies grew nervous. They saw the way Marlene paused just long enough before switching on her GoPro, like an actor waiting for the director's nod. They noticed how she edited out her slip-ups, how she never uploaded the stops that ended without fireworks. By the summer of that year, the department was barely holding itself together. Calls went unanswered. Case files stacked up. Evidence got lost. But to the world outside, Ashford seemed fine. Why? Because every few days, Sheriff Marr posted another video of herself standing tall, chin raised, delivering some line about keeping the streets safe. For older folks in town, the ones who had lived long enough to see past the filters, it was unsettling. They remembered sheriffs who lived by their word, not by their likes. They remembered law officers who blended into the town, not ones who turned it into a backdrop. But in a world where kids carried the internet in their pockets, their voices were drowned out. Marlene's stage grew bigger. She started giving interviews to small podcasts, even ran a short-lived live stream she called Ride with Marr, where she answered questions between calls. She loved the spotlight. The spotlight, however, doesn't forgive shadows. The older deputies knew the day was coming when the curtain would slip. They saw the way she twisted routine stops into dramatic clips. They noticed how her edited videos trimmed away anything that didn't suit her narrative. And though they kept their mouths shut, because in Ashford, speaking against the sheriff was a fast way to lose your job, they carried unease like a weight in their chests. That was the stage Marlene O'Connor built. Polished, flashy, and fragile. A stage that could hold as long as the lights stayed on. But the lights, as every seasoned man and woman in that county knew, had a way of burning out. And when they did, the truth underneath, ugly, unvarnished, and impossible to edit, would be waiting. It was late October, the kind of Thursday night in Ashford, Alabama, when the air carried that first sharp edge of fall. Folks had already turned their porch lights on, some even setting out pumpkins for the harvest festival that was just around the corner. Highway 60 was quiet, save for the steady hum of long-haul trucks moving toward Montgomery. Most of Ashford's good people were home by then, catching the evening news or dozing in recliners. Nothing unusual, nothing loud, but Sheriff Marlene O'Connor wasn't the kind to sit still in silence. Not anymore. She was behind the wheel of her patrol cruiser, a department-issued Ford Explorer with over 120,000 miles on it, running smooth enough but with a heater that rattled. Mounted on the dash was her most prized piece of equipment. Not the radio, not the shotgun locked up front, but the small GoPro camera blinking its red light. That camera had become her lifeline, her window into the attention economy. And tonight, it was already rolling. On her secondary Instagram account, where she kept things more personal, less polished, she was live streaming. Her voice carried that performative edge, part lawman, part preacher. The streets don't sleep, folks. Not here, not anywhere. Gotta stay vigilant. Her viewers, a mix of local admirers and curious strangers from across the country, tossed in little comments that scrolled fast across the screen. "We love you, Sheriff Marr. Keep us safe." Then she spotted him. It was at the Quick Fuel off Highway 60, one of those gas stations that had been around forever. Fluorescent lights buzzing, 2 pumps out of order, and an ice chest that hadn't been wiped down since Reagan. The kind of place truckers filled their tanks, and high schoolers stopped for sodas after late football practice. Standing under the harsh white glow, Leonard Price closed his car door. He had just come out of the store with a receipt folded in his hand. He wore a plain hoodie, dark jeans, and kept his head down, moving with the kind of calm that didn't attract attention, except to Marlene. Something in her clicked. To her followers, to the town. He wasn't Leonard. He was just another face. A man she could turn into a story. She paused her live stream, muttered something about patrolling, and shut off the engine. But the GoPro stayed on. It always did. She told herself the usual lines, the ones that had kept her conscience quiet these past 2 years. It isn't about race. It's about instincts, suspicion, gut feeling. Those words had become her shield, her excuse. But deep down, she was already scripting the voiceover in her head. This guy looked like he was up to something. You'll see why in a second. She approached his beat-up Buick like she'd rehearsed it 100 times. Flashlight in her right hand, chin tilted high, left palm resting on her belt. To anyone watching from a distance, she looked like the picture of authority. To Leonard, sitting in the driver's seat with both hands visible on the wheel, she looked like every other officer he'd studied across the South, someone who thought she could write the ending of a story before it began. "Evening, sir," she said, voice clipped, smile tight as piano wire. "You in a hurry tonight?" Leonard's tone was polite, steady. "No, ma'am, just got gas." "You know why I pulled you over?" He didn't flinch. "No, ma'am." "You didn't signal when pulling into the lot." It was a flimsy excuse, and both of them knew it. But Leonard didn't argue. He didn't smile or fill the silence with nervous chatter. He simply nodded, eyes steady, like a man cataloging every second. "Got ID on you. It's on the dash." She reached through his open window and picked it up, studying it longer than necessary. She should have walked back to her cruiser, run the license, called it in. That's what the manual said. But the manual wasn't her script. Instead, she lingered, shining her flashlight into the back seat, scanning for anything that could justify what she already wanted. A confrontation worth posting. "You from around here?" she asked. "Moved in last month, over near Dogwood Avenue." There it was again. That calm, measured voice. No panic, no defensiveness. And that bothered her more than anger ever could. Anger gave her content. Fear gave her drama. But this man, he gave her nothing. "Step out for me," she ordered. Leonard complied, slow and deliberate, his hands never leaving her sight. He stood beside the car, taller than she expected, posture relaxed but steady. The GoPro caught it all, the flashlight beam, the slight edge in her voice. The way he followed instructions without hesitation. What it didn't show, what she couldn't have guessed, was that another camera was recording too. Hidden in the collar of Leonard's jacket was a pinhole lens, synced with audio to an encrypted server hundreds of miles away. His device didn't edit, didn't trim, didn't spin. It simply told the truth. "Mind if I take a look inside the vehicle?" she asked. "Am I being detained, officer?" Leonard's voice was clear, calm. Her jaw tightened. That wasn't the response she wanted. She needed tension, resistance, something she could later frame as non-compliance. "I smell marijuana," she lied. "There isn't any," he answered, opening his jacket to show empty pockets. "I saw a bulge. Could be a weapon." "Nothing there," he said, still steady. "You're free to look." For a moment, she hesitated. The script wasn't unfolding the way she planned, but pride pressed her forward. She opened the trunk like she owned it. Inside were nothing but folded laundry, a first aid kit, and a clipboard with blank forms. No drugs, no guns, not even a broken tail light she could pin on him. Her irritation simmered. She thought about cutting the stop short, letting him go, pretending it never happened. But then she remembered the GoPro, the followers, the expectations. They didn't want to see hesitation. They wanted to see a sheriff in control. "All right," she muttered, forcing a smile. "Just a warning." "For what?" Leonard asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked back to her cruiser, leaving him standing there beside his open trunk. That night, she uploaded a 22-second clip to her TikTok. The footage showed Leonard stepping out of the car, edited to suggest unease, paired with ominous music. The caption read, "Late night stop. Always trust your gut. Stay safe out there." It racked up 40,000 views within an hour. But Marlene had made a mistake. A small one, so tiny most wouldn't notice. Except the right people did. She'd left in 3 seconds of background audio her editor hadn't cut. Clear as day, Leonard's voice could be heard. "You're searching the vehicle without a warrant." To her, it was nothing. A throwaway line, barely audible under the hum of the gas station lights. But to analysts in Quantico, it was everything. Leonard hadn't just been another black man in Ashford, caught on camera for someone else's glory. He was an undercover agent, and those 3 seconds of audio were the spark that lit the fuse. Marlene didn't know it yet. She sat at her desk later that night, sipping coffee gone cold, scrolling through praise on her phone. Another thug off the street. This is real policing. Every town needs a Sheriff March. She let the glow of those words warm her, blind her. But outside her bubble, the tide had shifted. Somewhere far beyond Ashford's quiet streets, red flags were flashing on screens that didn't care about likes or captions. Her stage had held steady for 2 years, but with one routine stop, one careless clip, the curtain began to fall. Morning broke quiet over Ashford, Alabama. The sun came slow and soft, spreading across the pine trees and farmland like warm molasses. Folks stirred early, farmers feeding cattle, shopkeepers sweeping their sidewalks, school buses rumbling out of the depot. On the surface, it was just another day in a town that prided itself on being steady, predictable, safe. But inside the sheriff's office, the first hairline cracks in that safety were forming. Sheriff Marlene O'Connor sat at her desk, her coffee already gone lukewarm, the glow of her phone lighting up her tired eyes. She scrolled through hundreds of comments on her latest TikTok clip, the one she'd filmed just hours earlier at the quick fuel gas station. It had already passed 100,000 views. To her, that meant victory. Proof that she was still the brand, still the face of Ashford's law and order. Another thug off the street. "You're the reason I still respect cops. This is real policing. Every town needs a Sheriff March." She let those words wash over her, ignoring the pang in her chest, the way exhaustion tugged at her skin. For years she had lived off this validation, fed by the endless stream of digital applause, but if she'd slowed down, looked closer, she might have noticed something else in the crowd of voices. Not all of them were cheering. Mixed in with the praise were comments that carried a different tone, quiet, skeptical, sharp as nails driven into old wood. Wait, what did he even do? Didn't hear anything about a ticket. She searched the car without a warrant, right? Where's the full footage? She scrolled faster, ignoring them. Trolls, she told herself. Always trolls. Jealous nobodies who didn't understand the risks of the badge. She'd dealt with them before. The algorithm didn't care about fairness or accuracy. It cared about engagement. And engagement she had. But then her phone buzzed again. A text this time. No contact name, just a number she didn't recognize. "You're not the only one with a camera." She froze. Her thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment, she felt that old familiar burn in her gut. The one she got right before a call went sideways. The one she pushed down and ignored. She wanted to believe it was nothing, just another internet crank. But something about it. The directness, the coldness. No emojis, no punctuation flourishes. Just words like a knife. "You're not the only one with a camera." Marlene locked her phone and set it face down on the desk. She wasn't going to feed it power. Not tonight. But the unease lingered. By mid-morning, news of her gas station stop was already circling beyond Ashford. A civil rights lawyer in Atlanta had pulled her clip, slowed it down, and posted a breakdown on Twitter. What folks these days now call X. He had highlighted the 3 seconds her editor missed. Leonard Price's voice, clear and firm, saying, "You're searching the vehicle without a warrant." To most, it was background noise. To him, it was evidence. A textbook example, he called it, of a Fourth Amendment violation. His thread gained traction fast. By noon, national accounts were retweeting it. In Quantico, Virginia, far from the dusty streets of Ashford, analysts flagged the clip. They cross-referenced it against Leonard's ongoing reports, matched GPS coordinates, and confirmed what he had been warning for months. Sheriff O'Connor wasn't just playing fast and loose. She was staging stops, twisting narratives, and crossing lines. For Leonard, the moment was quiet. He didn't celebrate, didn't gloat. At his modest apartment outside town, he simply logged into the Bureau's secure server, uploaded the raw footage from his jacket camera, and filed it under Subject 009. Live-streamed misconduct, Ashford PD. The file carried weight. It triggered alerts. His months of patience had finally tipped the scale, but Marlene didn't know any of that yet. She still thought she had the upper hand. That afternoon, in town, the whispers began. At the diner, two men argued over biscuits and gravy. "Sheriff Marr's keeping us safe, like always," one insisted. "Safe?" the other replied. "She searched that man's car without probable cause. You hear him? He called her on it." Over at the barber shop, where old-timers swapped stories between shaves, the talk was quieter but heavier. "Back in my day, you pulled someone over, you wrote the report clean, you didn't cut it up for TV." Heads nodded, faces frowned. And at Sycamore Baptist, during Thursday prayer circle, someone finally said out loud what others had been thinking. "Is she protecting us, or just performing for us?" Ashford was a town built on trust, but trust was fragile. It didn't take much, a single crack in the veneer, for people to start questioning. Back in the sheriff's office, the pressure mounted. Requests started coming in. Official ones, body cam footage, full reports, first from a state oversight committee, then from internal affairs. Then, shockingly, one marked DOJURGENT. Her lieutenant, a man who had once defended her decisions without hesitation, walked into her office with a face tight as wire. "We got a call," he said, closing the door behind him. "About what?" she asked, pretending not to know. "Internal affairs, state channels, anonymous complaint. They're requesting the full body cam audio and your incident report from last night." She scoffed, waving him off. "You're kidding." "Nope, they want everything on record. Today." Her stomach clenched, but her pride wouldn't let her show it. "There was no incident, no citation, just a warning." "They're saying you conducted a search." "I had reasonable suspicion," she snapped. He studied her face for a moment, then said quietly, "Well, you'll need to put that in writing." That was the first time she felt it. The loss of control. For years, she had run the department like her own show. Her word was final. Her narrative unchallenged. Now her own team was questioning her, however carefully, and it unnerved her. That night she sat at home scrolling through her feed, but the glow felt different. The comments had shifted. Instead of blind praise, there were cracks of doubt. Did he even do anything wrong? Why didn't she issue a ticket? Is this even legal? She ignored them, the way she always did. But deep down, she couldn't shake the image of Leonard's calm face at the gas station. He hadn't acted like a man caught off guard. He hadn't acted afraid. No, he had acted like someone who expected that stop. Like someone taking notes, storing every word. That unsettled her more than the anonymous text. More than the DOJ request. Because it meant she hadn't been the one in control that night. She had been the one playing her part. And he, whoever he really was, had been watching. By Friday morning, the story had grown legs. A local journalist picked it up, then a regional outlet. Headlines began to creep into homes where folks still read the paper with their morning coffee. Sheriff O'Connor accused of targeting black residents amid viral video. At the grocery store, whispers followed her down the aisles. In church pews, her name came up not as praise, but as concern. Even talk radio, usually a bastion of support, carried a caller who said, "If this is true, we got ourselves a real problem." Her stage, the one she had built so carefully with cameras and captions, was beginning to wobble. And no edit could fix it. That evening, her phone buzzed again. Another text from that same unknown number. "Control of the narrative isn't yours anymore." She stared at it for a long time. Her hand trembled slightly. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the sheriff. She felt like the suspect. And deep inside, beneath the anger, Beneath the pride, a single thought whispered, a thought she pushed away but couldn't silence. What if I've been playing on the wrong side of the camera all along? Ashford didn't know it yet. Marlene didn't know it yet. But that night marked the turning point. The curtain she had hung so carefully, with edits and filters and music, had begun to slip. And once it slips, once people catch even a glimpse of what lies behind, no performance can hide the truth again. By the time Sunday rolled around in Ashford, Alabama, the town no longer hummed with its usual calm. The whispers that had started in diners and barbershops had grown louder, creeping into pulpits and parking lots, finding their way into living rooms where televisions played news stories that folks usually dismissed as belonging to other places. But this time, the headlines had Ashford's name stamped across them. Sheriff O'Connor's tactics under fire. Did a routine stop cross the line? Civil rights lawyers demand review of viral video. It was one thing for Ashford to appear on the Weather Channel when tornadoes swept the county line. It was another thing entirely to appear in national stories about unlawful searches and racial profiling. And the people knew it. The spark that turned unease into fire came from a woman named Tianna Riggins, age 44. She was no stranger to cameras. Before moving back to Ashford to care for her elderly parents, she had worked in Atlanta as a local television producer. She knew how stories traveled, how they were cut, and how quickly they could spiral once the right audience found them. On a Thursday evening, her 16-year-old son, Darius, was walking home from school, still wearing his Letterman jacket. He was stopped outside a convenience store by Deputy Jimmy Langston, one of Marlene's younger men. Langston claimed Darius matched the description of a theft suspect. His hand rested too quickly on his holster. His words came too sharp. Darius froze, confused, voice trembling. "I didn't do anything. I'm just walking home." Langston didn't back down. A weapon wasn't drawn, but his tone carried the threat all the same. And that was when Tianna pulled up in her old Honda Accord, saw her boy cornered, and immediately hit record on her phone. Her voice cut into the footage, steady and fierce. "That's my son. He's not a suspect. He's a student. He's walking home." The video lasted barely 2 minutes, but when she posted it to her Facebook page with the caption, "My son is not a suspect. He's a student," it spread like wildfire. By evening, it had over 600,000 views. And unlike Marlene's polished clips, this one wasn't staged. It wasn't cut for drama. It was raw, shaky, filled with the sound of a boy's frightened breath and a mother's unflinching defense. By Friday, the people of Ashford could no longer ignore what was happening. At the diner, the same tables where folks had once shared Marlene's clips proudly on their phones were now split with unease. "She's still keeping us safe," one man argued, jabbing his fork into a plate of eggs. Another shook his head. "Safe don't mean stopping boys for walking home. That's not safety, that's harassment." At church, whispers passed down pews like notes in school. "Did you see that video? Did you see how calm that boy was? Where was the danger?" On local talk radio, even hosts who had once praised Sheriff Marr began hedging their support. "Now, I've backed the blue my whole life," one said carefully, "but if these stops are what they say, we might have ourselves a real problem." For a town built on appearances, doubt was a dangerous thing. Inside the sheriff's office, the tension was worse. Deputies avoided eye contact. Conversation stopped when Marlene walked into a room. A still frame from one of her older videos appeared taped to the break room fridge. A sticky note slapped across it reading, "Not everything needs to be content." She ripped it down without a word. But the sting stayed. Body cam review requests stacked up. 6 in one day. 4 from state agencies. 1 marked DOJ. That last one made her chest tighten. Her lieutenant, usually quiet, delivered the news with a tone that sounded less like respect and more like resignation. "They're looking at everything now, not just last night." The last 18 months Marlene bristled. She wasn't used to being questioned by her own people. For years, she had run the department like a one-woman show. But now, even her loyal deputy, Langston, hesitated when she gave orders. His voice on the phone cracked. "Cap, you think this is about that guy from the gas station?" She hung up without answering. Social media, the stage she had once ruled so effortlessly, was slipping from her grip. Her latest video, the gas station stop with Leonard Price, was still climbing in views, but the comments had turned. Praise mixed with skepticism outweighing loyalty. "This doesn't look right. Where's the full footage? Isn't this illegal?" Worse, Tianna Riggins had gone on a local podcast that Friday night, speaking calmly, firmly. She mentioned a pattern of stops, a pattern she said matched her son's experience with what others had described before. She even said a name, Leonard. When Marlene heard it, her stomach flipped. She turned off her screen immediately, her fingers trembling. Because that was the moment she realized. Leonard Price wasn't just another man she could script into her content. He was part of something larger, something watching her. At the station, the walls felt thinner. 2 officers whispered over a computer, their eyes darting to her office. The receptionist's smile had grown clipped, forced. Even the sergeant, who had once backed her at every town hall, now kept his sentences short, his tone cautious. The unease grew heavier, like the humidity before a storm. Marlene felt it every time she walked down the hallway, the silence that trailed her, the weight of eyes on her back. On Saturday morning, the Savannah Ledger carried a headline above the fold. Captain O'Connor accused of targeting black residents amid viral complaints. Just beneath it, another article. Who is Leonard Price? The second story had no photo, no background, just speculation. But the mere fact of it being printed sent shockwaves through town. People wanted to know who the man was, the one who had stared down their sheriff without fear, the one whose voice carried calmly through that viral clip. At the Piggly Wiggly checkout line, women whispered about him over grocery carts. At the park, parents asked one another if they thought he was military, or worse, federal. Ashford was a small town. It didn't take much for questions to spread, and once they started, they didn't stop. By Monday morning, Marlene's phone rang with a number she couldn't ignore. Mayor Glenn Harrow, a retired insurance broker with a reputation for keeping the peace, wanted her in his office. Off the clock. She arrived stiff, her uniform sharp, her chin high. He didn't bother with small talk. "We need to issue a statement," he said. "I already did," she replied. "I told the local press the footage is under review." "Not that kind of statement." She narrowed her eyes. "What then?" "Darla," he said, using her first name in a way that carried weight. "This isn't just internet chatter anymore. You're not just the face of the department. Right now, you're the face of the town, and the town is getting hate mail." "I've done nothing wrong," she snapped. He leaned forward, folding his hands. "Maybe not, but perception matters. And right now, the perception is that Ashford's sheriff is targeting black residents for the sake of clicks." "You think I care about clicks?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence told her enough. She stood abruptly, heat rising in her chest. "I'm not stepping down." "I'm not asking you to," he said. "Not yet." The word yet followed her out the door like a shadow. That night, Marlene drove aimlessly through town. She passed the quick fuel gas station, the school where she had once given speeches, the park where she had filmed herself handing out popsicles in the summer heat. Everywhere she went, she saw the same thing. People watching her, not smiling, not waving, just watching. Even her most loyal online supporters had gone quiet. Fewer reposts, fewer shares, fewer words of blind praise. The silence was louder than criticism. For 2 years, Sheriff Marlene O'Connor had built herself a stage, polished, dramatic, untouchable. But now the stage was shaking beneath her boots. The applause was faltering, and in its place came a heavier sound, The murmur of doubt, the weight of suspicion, the steady drum of truth breaking through the performance. Ashford wasn't the same town anymore, and neither was she. By late October, Ashford felt like a stage where the actors had forgotten their lines. The town still looked the same on the surface, flags fluttering from front porches, kids peddling rusty Schwinns down cracked sidewalks, church bells ringing the noon hour. But the rhythm had changed. People were whispering in the aisles of the Piggly Wiggly. Farmers in ball caps traded rumors at the feed store. And inside the sheriff's department, silence was louder than words. Sheriff Marlene O'Connor had always carried herself like a woman untouchable. But lately, even she felt the shift. Every time she walked into the office, conversations died mid-sentence. Deputies looked away. Some of them, the younger ones especially, kept their eyes glued to their screens like children pretending not to notice the storm building outside the window. But the storm was already here. Marlene told herself she needed one good video, one win to silence the doubters and drown out the questions. If the town wanted transparency, she'd give it to them. If the internet wanted proof of her vigilance, she'd hand it over on a silver platter. So she called Deputy Jimmy Langston, one of the few men left who still seemed willing to follow her orders. Langston was 35, nervous by nature, but loyal enough to her, or maybe just scared enough not to resist. "Meet me at the old industrial park on the east side," she told him. 8 o'clock sharp, routine patrol. Langston hesitated. "That place is dead, Cap. Nothing but stray dogs and teenagers." "We've had complaints," she snapped. "Bring your vest. Leave your body cam off." That last part made him swallow hard. "That's against protocol." "So is leaking footage to the press," she shot back. He went quiet after that. Quiet was as good as obedience. Marlene hung up, convinced she had regained control. She'd stage the stop, record it clean, edit it sharp, and push it out before the town could even think twice. A sheriff back in charge. A sheriff still worth following. She didn't know her phone had been tapped 2 days earlier. Didn't know every word she spoke now reached a team of federal agents camped just blocks away. For 7 months, Leonard Price had been embedded in Ashford, collecting data, logging every suspicious stop, every fabricated charge. He knew Marlene's patterns better than some of her deputies did, and when she pulled him over at that quick fuel station, the final piece of the puzzle had locked into place. The raw footage he uploaded, the one where her voice muttered reasonable suspicion after he accused her of searching without a warrant, set off alarms at the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Red flags cascaded across screens in Quantico. Internal Affairs in Montgomery was looped in, and the word came down from a supervisor. Move it forward. Containment, not observation. For the first time in months, Leonard was no longer just a ghost watching from the sidelines. He was the key witness in a live takedown. The Bureau dispatched a team to Ashford, men and women in plain suits who blended into town like visiting sales reps. They rented cars from Montgomery, checked into a quiet motel outside the county line, and never carried badges on their belts. To the people of Ashford, they were nobodies. To Leonard, they were backup. At 8:42 p.m. on that crisp Thursday night, Marlene's cruiser rolled into the gravel lot behind the abandoned industrial park. The building stood like a skeleton of concrete and rust, windows shattered, weeds tall enough to hide coyotes. Langston was already there, leaning against the hood of his car, shifting from foot to foot like a man whose nerves were fraying. "What's the play?" he asked. Marlene handed him a clipboard. "Got a tip. Same guy from the gas station, Price, might be casing the place. If he shows, we document it. Quick and clean." Langston frowned. "I'm not planting anything, Cap." "No one's asking you to," she snapped. "If he runs, we follow. If he resists, we detain." Simple, but across the street, 2 black SUVs idled in the shadows. Inside, federal agents adjusted their comms, cameras aimed at the lot. One of them raised binoculars. Another clicked a mic twice. Signal received. And from the second story of an old warehouse across the street, Leonard watched through a cracked window. He had no need to move. Every step she took was already in frame. At 9:07 p.m., Marlene positioned herself behind a rusted container, flashlight low, waiting for a figure that would never arrive. She imagined Leonard walking by, hoodie up, glancing around like a man about to commit a crime. She pictured herself stepping out, commanding presence, catching him in the act. She could already hear the caption in her head. "Stay alert, stay safe. This is why we wear the badge." But Leonard didn't show. Instead, her radio crackled to life. "Unit 3 to Captain O'Connor. Code 15. Immediate request for location check." She frowned. "Say again?" The voice repeated. "Dispatch has received an anonymous tip. Possible misconduct in progress at the industrial park." Her heart jolted. "Who's calling this in?" Another voice broke through the static, calm and unfamiliar. "Captain O'Connor, this is Special Agent Robert Mencken with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Please remain where you are. You are currently being monitored under an open federal inquiry." Her breath caught. For the first time in years, she froze. Langston stepped back, his face pale. "Cap, what's going on?" She didn't answer, couldn't. Across the street, the SUV's headlights blinked twice. Doors opened. Agents stepped out, not with guns drawn, but with the quiet confidence of men who already owned the moment. The next morning, Ashford woke to an eerie silence. No new uploads, no filtered footage, no cheery, "Stay safe out there, folks," from Sheriff Marr. Instead, 3 unmarked vehicles rolled into the sheriff's department lot at dawn. The men inside wore plain suits, carried sealed folders, and moved with the authority of a hammer dropping. Inside her office, Marlene hadn't slept. Her gun and badge sat on the desk like abandoned props. Her phone had stopped buzzing at 3 in the morning. No more trolls, no more praise, no more lifeline. At 7:04 a.m., the door opened. Special Agent Mencken entered, calm as Sunday morning, a sealed folder in his hand. "Captain O'Connor," he said evenly, "we're serving a federal arrest warrant. You are being charged with obstruction of justice, falsification of public records, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law." She didn't argue, didn't stand. She just stared at him, lips thin, eyes hollow. "You planned this," she whispered. Mencken nodded once. "No, Sheriff. You planned it for us." Her laugh came dry, bitter. "And him? The one I stopped? Elijah Price is a federal agent. His assignment here is complete." The realization hit her like a stone dropped in still water. Every ripple, every decision, every clip she'd filmed, all of it had led her straight into a trap she built herself. When Mencken read her rights, she didn't resist. She placed her hands behind her back and let him cuff her. Outside, deputies who had once cheered her walked past the windows, some looking away, some watching with unblinking eyes. The stage she had built, the spotlight she had demanded, was finally gone. And in its place was the raw, unedited sound of footsteps on concrete and the metallic click of handcuffs tightening. For Leonard, there was no victory lap, no press conference, no smile for the cameras. He stepped out of the warehouse that morning as Marlene was led away. He didn't look triumphant. He didn't need to. His presence alone told the story. The quiet man she thought she could humiliate had been the one writing the real script all along. When a reporter shoved a microphone toward him, "Sir, any comment on what happened here?" He paused for just a moment, then answered with words as sharp as a gavel. "The truth speaks louder than edits." That was all. And it was enough. The first light of Friday crept slowly across Ashford, the sky painted in muted shades of pink and gray. Most of the town still slept. The milk trucks hadn't started their routes yet, and the only movement on Main Street came from a handful of men setting up the bakery's deliveries. But at the sheriff's department, The quiet was broken by the sound of 3 unmarked federal vehicles rolling into the lot. No sirens, no flashing lights. Just the heavy crunch of tires on gravel and the silence of authority. Inside, Sheriff Marlene O'Connor sat at her desk, a woman who hadn't closed her eyes all night. Her badge lay beside her coffee cup, dull in the pale light, her sidearm resting inches away. She hadn't touched either since the night before. The phone on her desk, once her constant lifeline to likes and praise, had gone silent around 3 in the morning. No buzzing, no notifications, no applause. The audience had left the theater. She told herself she still had time, that she could spin it, reshape the story, reclaim control. She had done it before. But deep down, in the pit of her stomach, she knew this was different. At 7:04 a.m., the door to her office opened. Special Agent Robert Mencken stepped inside, a sealed folder in his hand. He looked nothing like the villains she had built her career fighting against in her videos. No sneer, no anger, no swagger. Just calm, steady professionalism, the kind that didn't need a camera to prove itself. "Captain O'Connor," he said, his voice level, "we're serving a federal arrest warrant. You are being charged with obstruction of justice, falsification of public records, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law." The words hung in the air like a bell tolling at a funeral. For the first time in her career, Marlene didn't have a script. No caption, no edit, no comeback. "You planned this," she said finally, her voice hollow. Mencken shook his head. "No, Sheriff, you planned it for us." A dry, bitter laugh escaped her lips. "And him?" "The one I stopped. Elijah Price is a federal agent," Mencken replied. "His assignment here is complete." The name hit her like a stone. Elijah Price. The quiet man with a calm voice at the gas station. The one who hadn't flinched, hadn't fought, hadn't broken script. He hadn't been a prop in her story. He had been the author of it. When Mencken read her rights, she didn't resist. She stood slowly, the weight of her 58 years pressing down on her shoulders, and placed her hands behind her back. The handcuffs clicked tight, colder than she expected, heavier than she admitted. Outside, the deputies gathered near the windows. Some looked away, ashamed. Others didn't blink, their faces carved from stone. A few of the younger recruits shifted uncomfortably, like boys who had realized the ending of a story they thought was heroic was nothing but a farce. As Marlene stepped through the front door of the station, the October morning air felt sharper, cutting through her uniform like a blade. The gravel crunched under her boots, the sound echoing in her ears louder than any applause she had ever received online. A local reporter, her microphone trembling in her hand, called out, "Captain O'Connor, any comment?" Marlene didn't answer. She couldn't. For years, she had built her brand on words. Words spoken, words edited, words spun into stories. But now, silence was all she had left. Behind her, Agent Mencken walked steady, his presence enough to fill the void. And just to her left, Elijah Price appeared, stepping into the morning light. Not as a suspect, not even as just a witness, but as the man who had seen everything. The man who had waited. The man she had underestimated. The reporter swung her camera toward him. "Sir, are you willing to comment on what happened here?" Elijah paused, his face unreadable. Then, in a voice calm and steady, he said, "The truth speaks louder than edits." That was all, and it was enough. By noon, footage of Marlene being let out in handcuffs was everywhere. Shared on Facebook, dissected on Twitter, replayed on local news. But unlike her polished clips, this video had no filters, no background music, no clever captions. Just raw sound. The steady shuffle of footsteps, the sharp zip of handcuffs, the quiet murmur of agents doing their job. For once, she wasn't the director. She was the subject. Public reaction came fast. Some of her die-hard supporters clung to her defense, claiming it was political, a setup, punishment for being too tough. But the evidence was too strong, the timelines too precise, the audio too damning. Civil rights lawyers lined up to speak on camera, citing not just one video but dozens of her past stops. Old complaints were dug out, body cam footage cross-checked. Patterns emerged, patterns impossible to ignore. One teenager she had once painted as aggressive was revealed to have been sitting quietly in the back seat of his mother's car, hands folded, lips moving in silent prayer. Another man she had accused of resisting arrest was shown on uncut footage asking calmly, "Why am I being detained?" The theater of her brand unraveled thread by thread, until all that was left was the ugly, unedited truth. By week's end, the department's website had a new interim captain. Marlene's name was scrubbed from every page. Her social media accounts vanished overnight, deleted or suspended under pressure. Her legacy wasn't erased by trolls or outsiders. It was erased by her own obsession with being seen. And Ashford, quiet, steady Ashford, was left to reckon with itself. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation placed the Sheriff's Department under temporary oversight. Deputies now wore new body cams with auto-upload systems. Reports were double audited. For the first time in years, the public was invited into listening sessions at Town Hall. Some nights they were heated, some nights emotional, but they were necessary. Meanwhile, Marlene sat in a federal holding facility outside Atlanta. The walls were gray, the days long. Her trial date hadn't been announced yet, but her charges had grown. 2 more counts of civil rights violations were added. A conspiracy charge followed. Her lawyer, a mid-tier defense man from Macon, floated the idea of a plea deal, but she refused. To her, she wasn't corrupt. She wasn't a criminal. She was misunderstood. Misguided, maybe. Ambitious, certainly, but not guilty. Public opinion disagreed. For nearly 2 years, Sheriff Marlene O'Connor had lived her life as though the world were a stage. Every stop was a scene, every arrest a storyline, every edited clip a sermon to an invisible congregation. But in the end, the stage she built had collapsed under its own weight. Because no matter how many edits you cut, no matter how carefully you script the narrative, the truth has a way of slipping through. And when it does, it doesn't need music or filters or applause. It just needs to be believed. Ashford had seen storms before. Tornadoes that tore through fields, floods that filled the low roads, fires that left scars on barns and homes. Folks knew how to rebuild after those. You cleared the debris, hammered new boards, prayed on Sunday, and carried on. But this storm was different. You couldn't shovel out trust, you couldn't sand down shame, and once the truth had broken open, you couldn't patch it with plywood and nails. The Friday after Sheriff Marlene O'Connor was led out of her own department in handcuffs, the town of Ashford woke to a silence it didn't recognize. No new upload from Sheriff Marr. No bright captions telling them to stay safe. Just headlines splashed across newspapers and TV screens, and the uneasy knowledge that the woman they'd trusted to protect them had been protecting herself all along. At the feed store that morning, a copy of the Savannah Ledger lay folded on the counter. The front page carried a grainy still of Marlene's walk in cuffs. Beside it, a headline that stopped men mid-chew of their tobacco. Sheriff O'Connor charged in federal probe. Pattern of misconduct alleged. Nobody said much at first. A couple of old farmers adjusted their caps. One cleared his throat. Finally, a man with a weathered face muttered, "I'll be damned." I thought she was the best thing we had going. Another shook his head. Best thing or best show? That question lingered in the air long after the conversation ended. By Monday, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation had stepped in. The sheriff's office, once Marlene's stage, was stripped bare of its polish. Federal agents walked its halls in plain suits, auditing files, demanding reports, pulling body cam footage that had never seen the light of day. Deputies who had once strutted alongside their captain now sat stiff in interviews, their words recorded, their loyalty measured against the evidence stacked high in cardboard boxes. New rules were posted on bulletin boards. All body cams must remain active during stops. Reports must be filed within 24 hours, no exceptions. Evidence logs will be double audited weekly. The tone had shifted. No more smiles for the camera. No more staged captions. Just the weight of accountability pressing down on every man and woman in uniform. The first town hall after the arrest was standing room only. Folding chairs creaked beneath the weight of farmers, teachers, mothers with children tugging at their sleeves. The mayor, Glenn Harrow, stood behind the podium, his hands gripping the sides like a man clinging to a sinking ship. "We're here tonight to listen," he said, "to reckon with what's happened, and to start talking about where we go from here." The first to speak was a teenager. His voice shook, but he didn't back down. "2 years ago, she stopped me. No ticket, no charges, just humiliation. I thought I did something wrong. I carried that for years. Now I know. It wasn't me. It was her." The room went quiet. Mothers wiped at their eyes. Men who had once defended Marlene shifted in their seats. Next came Tianna Riggins, holding her son's hand as she approached the microphone. "My son is not a suspect," she said firmly. "He is a student, and no mother in this town should have to pull out her phone to prove her child's innocence." Applause broke out then. Slow, hesitant at first, then rising into something strong. For the first time in years, the people of Ashford weren't watching a performance. They were speaking their own truth. Within weeks, Tianna launched a grassroots group called Citizens First. What began as a Facebook page became a movement. Meetings filled church basements and community centers. Black, white, old, young. All sat side by side, committed to one idea: accountability. Members documented stops, collected testimonies, and pushed for reforms. By Christmas, they had over 300 volunteers. What Marlene had built on illusion, Tianna built on raw honesty. And people trusted it because it wasn't polished. It wasn't edited. It was real. Ashford changed in small ways, too. In the diner, where once folks had shared Marlene's clips proudly on their phones, now they argued about fairness and truth. The conversations were messy, heated, sometimes uncomfortable, but they were happening. At the high school, teachers started weaving lessons about civil rights into history class. Not just the national names like Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King Jr., but the local stories too. Kids who had seen their brothers or cousins stopped on back roads now had a language to explain what happened. Even the deputies themselves began to shift. A young recruit, once dazzled by Marlene's spotlight, confided to an older officer, "I signed up to serve, not to make content." The older man nodded. "Then serve, and don't let anyone make you forget that again." The story didn't stop at Ashford's borders. National outlets ran features about the TikTok sheriff. Legal analysts dissected her downfall on prime time. Civil rights groups pointed to her case as proof of a deeper, systemic issue. When image becomes more important than integrity, the people pay the price. Some outsiders scoffed at the town, calling Ashford gullible for buying into her act, but others defended it. "Small towns trust their sheriffs," one columnist wrote, "and trust, once broken, is the hardest thing to rebuild." Meanwhile, Marlene sat in a federal holding facility outside Atlanta. Her trial date loomed, and the list of charges grew longer. Her lawyer pushed for a plea deal. She refused. In her mind, she wasn't corrupt. She wasn't criminal. She was misunderstood. The world had turned on her, not because she broke the law, but because she had been too bold, too visible. But the evidence said otherwise. Patterns don't lie. And Leonard Price. By the time Christmas lights blinked across Ashford's porches, his apartment was empty. No farewell party, no press appearance. Just a note taped to the door in his steady handwriting. "Healing starts when truth is louder than fear." People whispered about him for weeks. Some claimed he was military. Others said he was FBI. A few still insisted he was just a man who got lucky with the right lawyer. But the truth was simpler. He wasn't the story. He was the mirror. By spring, the dust began to settle. The silence in Ashford wasn't the same as before. It was heavier, but it was honest. People no longer waved blindly at uniforms. They asked questions. They demanded explanations. At the second town hall, a woman stood up and said, "We can't change what happened, but we can make sure it doesn't happen again." And that was enough. Ashford would never be perfect. No town ever is. But perfection was never the goal. The goal was truth. And truth, once spoken and believed, reshapes a place in ways no camera ever can. For years, Sheriff Marlene O'Connor had told Ashford what to see. Now Ashford was learning to see for itself. And that, in the end, was the real reckoning. Spring came late to Ashford that year. The air stayed cold longer than folks expected, and the magnolia buds held back as though the land itself was waiting for something to break open. But slowly, like all things in small-town Alabama, change arrived. Not all at once, not dramatic like Marlene O'Connor's arrest, but steady, like water wearing down stone. For months, the courthouse square had been abuzz with reporters, lawyers, and curious onlookers. Ashford, a town that once prided itself on being overlooked, was suddenly a point on the national map. Trucks from CNN and Fox had parked outside City Hall. Journalists with pressed suits and fast mouths spoke about systemic abuse and the power of social media, while townspeople shook their heads and muttered that they'd never seen anything like it. But by the time Easter rolled around, the cameras had gone. The reporters packed up, chasing fresher stories. What was left was Ashford itself, its people, its scars, and its choice about who they wanted to be when the dust settled. Marlene sat in a federal holding facility outside Atlanta. Her once sharp posture slumped, her once proud voice diminished. At first, she had refused to see herself as guilty. She told her lawyer she was misunderstood, a casualty of politics. She said her only crime was ambition, that she had given the town what it wanted: safety, spectacle, a hero in uniform. But prosecutors laid the evidence out plain. Dozens of stops, edited footage, reports that contradicted body cams, old complaints dug from files she thought buried. And the most damning, Leonard's footage, time-stamped, clean, undeniable. Her trial date drew near. The Justice Department added counts of civil rights violations. A conspiracy charge followed. Her lawyer pushed for a plea deal, a lighter sentence in exchange for cooperation. But Marlene, stubborn to the last, refused. In her mind, she hadn't failed. The town had failed her. The country had turned against her. She wore her bitterness like armor. But bitterness doesn't stop a gavel. And when the day came, the gavel fell hard. She was sentenced to federal prison. No TikTok edits, no clever captions. Just the sound of a judge declaring her guilty in a courtroom full of faces. Some angry, some relieved, most just tired. As for Leonard Price, he vanished as quietly as he had come. One morning, his apartment was empty. His car gone, the blinds drawn. All that remained was a note taped to the door in his careful handwriting. Healing starts when truth is louder than fear. People speculated for months. Some swore he was FBI. Others guessed military intelligence. A few said he was just a man with courage enough to stand still in the face of power. But the truth was simpler. Leonard had never been the story. He had been the mirror. And when Ashford looked into him, it saw itself clearly for the first time in years. If Marlene had been the flame that burned, Tianna Riggins was the lantern that stayed lit. Citizens, first, the grassroots group she started, grew faster than anyone expected. By summer, they had nearly 500 members, black, white, young, old, churchgoers and skeptics alike. They held forums, monitored stops, and partnered with civil rights attorneys to educate people on their rights. They weren't radicals. They weren't out to tear the town apart. They were neighbors demanding that the law serve them, not perform for them. Tianna became the face of something Marlene never could: trust. She wasn't polished, wasn't edited, wasn't chasing likes. She was a mother who had stood in front of her son with a phone in her hand and said, Not today. And people believed her, because belief is born from truth, not from filters. Ashford began to change in ways both small and large. At the diner, the talk shifted from football scores to accountability. At the barbershop, men who once defended Marlene admitted grudgingly that maybe they'd been blinded by the show. The high school introduced new lessons about civil rights, not as distant history, but as living truth. Students wrote essays about Leonard, about Tianna, about the power of speaking up. At the sheriff's department, things were different too. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation's oversight forced reforms. Every deputy wore body cams that auto-uploaded to secure servers. Reports were audited twice. Complaints were logged publicly. For the first time in years, the badge felt less like a stage prop and more like a tool for service. And slowly, trust began to regrow. The story of Ashford didn't stay in Ashford. Other towns watched. Other departments adjusted. Civil rights lawyers used Marlene's downfall as a case study. Universities taught it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of chasing image over integrity. For Ashford, that meant pride of a different kind. Not the pride of having a TikTok famous sheriff, but the pride of surviving a reckoning. The pride of facing the truth, however painful, and choosing to be better. At the second town hall after Marlene's sentencing, an older woman stood at the microphone. Her hair was white, her voice trembled, but her words cut clear. "I lived through the days when speaking up could cost you your job, or worse," she said. "I stayed quiet then. I regret that, but not now, not anymore. This time, I will speak." The room erupted in applause. Later, a young deputy stood to address the crowd. He was nervous, his voice cracking like a boy at his first debate. "I joined the force to serve," he said, "but somewhere along the way, we forgot what service meant. We're remembering now, and I promise you, I won't forget again." The applause that followed was heavier, slower, not the applause of a show, but the applause of belief. By fall, the news trucks were gone, the headlines had faded, and Ashford slipped back into the quiet rhythm of small-town life. But it wasn't the same quiet as before. It was heavier, honest. When a deputy pulled someone over now, people watched closely, but without fear. When someone filed a complaint, they knew it would be heard. When a mother spoke out, she wasn't dismissed as emotional. She was respected as a citizen. Ashford wasn't perfect. It never would be. But perfection had never been the goal. The goal was truth. Marlene O'Connor had built her career on illusion, on edits, on a stage crafted for an invisible audience. And for a while, she fooled them all. But in the end, illusion crumbled under the weight of truth. Because truth doesn't need filters. Truth doesn't need applause. Truth doesn't roar. It whispers. It whispers in a teenager's trembling voice at a town hall, in a mother's firm defense of her child, in a quiet note taped to a door. Healing starts when truth is louder than fear. And those whispers, once believed, are stronger than any performance. For Ashford, the story wasn't about the fall of one sheriff. It was about the rise of a community that found its voice. A community that learned trust must be earned, not staged. The lesson was clear, simple, and eternal. In a world quick to judge and slow to listen, it takes courage, honesty, and love for one another to turn fear into healing, and to build a future where justice isn't performed, but lived. 1. Truth outlasts illusion. For nearly 2 years, Sheriff Marlene O'Connor built her life on illusion. Every traffic stop became a stage. Every arrest a carefully cut clip meant to prove her authority. She believed if people saw what she wanted them to see, the rest wouldn't matter. For a time, it worked. She had the applause, the followers, the headlines. But truth has a way of slipping through cracks. One slip of audio, 3 seconds long, was enough to unravel the empire she had built. The lesson is simple, yet powerful. You can polish a lie until it shines, but the shine won't last. Truth, no matter how quietly it speaks, will always outlast the illusion. For those of us who've lived long enough to see fashions fade, politicians rise and fall, and promises made and broken, we know this in our bones. The young sometimes chase appearances. The old know appearances can't be trusted. Truth does not roar, it whispers. But whispers have a way of echoing across decades. When Leonard Price calmly told her, "You're searching without a warrant," his words carried further than any of her slick captions. They carried because they were true. And when truth and illusion collide, illusion always breaks first. 2. Silence protects the wrong people. For years, townsfolk in Ashford stayed quiet. They watched Marlene's videos, nodded along, shared them on social media. Even those who doubted her methods held their tongues. "That's just how it is around here," they told themselves. "Best not stir the pot." But silence has a cost. It protects the wrong people. It allows harm to grow roots. A teenager humiliated at a traffic stop carried that shame for 2 years, thinking he had done something wrong because no one told him otherwise. Mothers prayed over their children, teachers bit their tongues, deputies turned away. And in that silence, Marlene thrived. It took a mother with a cell phone, Tianna Riggins, to break it. She refused to stay quiet when her son was stopped. She said aloud, "My son is not a suspect, he is a student." Her voice shattered the silence, and the truth rushed in behind it. The lesson here is not just for Ashford, it is for every one of us. When good people stay quiet, bad people get louder. Speaking up doesn't always mean shouting. Sometimes it means standing steady, holding a line, refusing to bend to fear. But when enough people do it, the silence ends. And real change begins. 3. Power belongs to the people who believe in each other. Marlene believed power came from perception. She thought her following made her strong, her videos untouchable. But when the truth broke through, it wasn't her carefully edited brand that saved the town. It was the people. Citizens. First, the grassroots group started by Tianna grew into a force stronger than any one sheriff. Farmers, teachers, parents, retirees, black and white, old and young, all stood side by side. Their power didn't come from views or likes. It came from belief. Belief that justice mattered. Belief that neighbors could hold each other accountable. Belief that a small town could look itself in the mirror and choose something better. For those of us who've seen generations come and go, the lesson rings true. Real power isn't in the spotlight. It's in the people willing to trust one another enough to speak, to listen, and to change. Politicians, officers, leaders come and go. But community, that is what endures. Ashford learned this the hard way, but once they learned it, they couldn't go back. Deputies trained differently. Parents raised their children differently. Teachers taught history differently. A town that had once been silent became a town that spoke. And in that, they found something stronger than Marlene's illusion ever was. They found each other. The story of Ashford isn't just about a sheriff who fell. It's about a town that realized silence was dangerous, truth was precious, and power belonged not to a badge, but to the people who refused to be fooled. For those of us seasoned by time, the lessons are familiar. We've seen illusions crumble, heard truth whispered, lived through times when silence cost more than speaking. And maybe that is why this story matters. It reminds us that no matter our age, no matter our place, we still hold the choice. To stay quiet or to speak. To chase image or to hold truth. To live for ourselves or for one another. Because at the end of the day, when the cameras fade and the applause dies, only one thing remains. The legacy of what we believed in and the courage we carried. We've walked through Ashford's story and the hard lessons it left behind. Truth outlasting illusion, silence protecting the wrong people, and the power that comes when ordinary folks stand together. Now I want to hear from you. Which lesson speaks to you the most, and why? Do you believe silence is the most dangerous, or that truth is the strongest weapon we have? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story gave you something valuable, hit like, subscribe, and join us. So together, we can keep these conversations alive and growing.